The Cincinnati Reds are in a much better spot to endure an injury to Spencer Steer now than they were last year. I'll tell you why on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am so glad that you're alongside me here today. I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, and I'm going into my 7th season now hosting this Locked On Reds podcast that is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team, your Cincinnati Reds, every single day. And on today's show, we're 24 days away from opening day, which means we will celebrate Tony Perez later on in this show. But the big news of the weekend pertains to Spencer Steer's shoulder. I believe this changes our expectations of him for 2025, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But I want to begin today's show by looking at how the Reds will weather this storm. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And where we will get started here today is with the news about Spencer Steer. In case you missed it, he was scratched from the lineup on Saturday. Spencer Steer began the spring training slate of games with a bit of a shoulder impingement, I believe is what they were calling it. And I was touching my left shoulder there for our video folks, but it says in his right shoulder, his throwing shoulder. He was unable to throw, but he could hit. He could still at least DH, and the plan was he was going to rehab daily to get back to playing in the field. But progress was little, if any, to the point that he was scratched on Saturday and he received a cortisone shot in that shoulder. It's interesting to note, I feel like any time I hear about a player getting a cortisone shot, I don't necessarily know that we see a quick recovery, a quick bounce back. And because of that, and because of some of the things that he said, I think that Spencer Steer is going to begin the season on the IL. Once we hit opening day and the regular season begins, I don't know that Spencer Steer is going to be ready at that point. Now, no reporting has been made to that effect, but just kind of reading the tea leaves and listening to how Spencer Steer talks about this, I think that we can kind of divulge and we can kind of figure that out. We can infer that from what he says.
Yeah, hopefully just the plan is to get me over the hump. Seems like I've kind of been treading water here the last week, trying to get back to throwing. So hoping that this is a step in the right direction and we can get some some positive momentum going forward to throwing and getting back on the field. Yeah, I think it's positive. I think it's a step in the right direction for sure. And like I said, just been having a tough time getting over the hump, getting back to throwing. So we feel like this was kind of the best move going forward. I think it's a lot of inefficiencies and compensation from playing through the injury. I think I got into a lot of bad habits mechanically. The body's smart. It finds ways to compensate and fight through injuries. So just created some bad habits. So really trying to kind of teach the shoulder again how to move properly. So going to focus on that the next week and hopefully get back into loading it up and getting the strength back and getting ready to roll.
Notice what he said there, retrain his shoulder. A lot of what he did, and it has been reported that this is an injury he dealt with late last season, and it just hasn't gone away, and he thought that he was going to be able to play through it and really rehab it while still playing, but it does not seem that that is going to be the case. So with that, he is now doing something different, and I believe that this is another attempt at a solution. By his tone, by the words that he said, I feel as though they are still searching for that solution and what that could be. And I think that part of it is just going to be laying off of the shoulder, right? There's a lot of these soft tissue injuries that players deal with that rest is kind of the main prescription for it. It's not a surgery type deal. It's nothing too dramatic like that, but it's something that they just kind of have to rest and let heal. And this kind of feels like that scenario. He said, he got the shot. They're going to, kind of take this next week, and then hopefully he can get back to building the strength up. It almost sounds as if everything is paused for him for the next week. And I like that individually. And I really want to dive into what this means individually for him here in just a few minutes. But what it means for the roster, I think the Reds are actually uniquely positioned to weather this storm right now. Think about where they are compared to last season. Last season, no Matt McLain, no CES. Spencer Steer was the 2 in the 1-2 punch with Elly De La Cruz. Elly De La Cruz never really had that consistent second part of the 1-2 punch. He consistently was the Reds' best player. Nobody else was right there with him. Spencer Steer at times was, and the power numbers will bear that out. He had a nice home run total, a nice RBI total. The RBI total was more so for the fact that Spencer Steer hit in the middle of the lineup behind Elly De La Cruz. You just had more opportunities to knock in runs there. So I don't want to, there's going to be people that look at his RBI total and say, see, he is indispensable. The reason that I think that the Reds can at least weather this storm for the time being is because CES and Matt McLain are healthy now. I still hold firm to what we said last year about CES, and that I thought he could be the Reds' best hitter. He has shown early on this spring training that he is healthy. And while I am not going to get into the stats, because spring training stats don't matter. I don't know how many times I need to say this spring, but I'll say it at least one more. Spring training stats don't matter. But it does matter that he is healthy, that he is making plays both in the field and at the plate, and he's doing it on a consistent enough basis that he is building confidence in his own abilities, but he is also giving Terry Francona confidence that he can call on him on opening day all the way through game 162. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that's the case. But it seems as though there is nothing that is ailing CES. Same goes for Matt McLain. Both these guys look fantastically healthy, making great plays in the field, great plays at the plate. I love what I'm seeing from both of them. So when it comes to storylines of the early spring training and what are you buying, what are you selling, I'm buying that CES and Matt McLain look healthy right now. And that is so big for me because we know what we're going to get out of Elly. We're going to get electricity. We're going to get excitement. We're going to get production. We need somebody behind, though. The Reds need somebody behind him. Or, in the case of Matt McLain, who's been hitting in front of him in the lineup a lot, something I want to discuss later on this week. They're getting production in front of him, too. That's something that is going to be so key for the Reds' playoff hopes in 2025. But you have those two guys. Matt McLain, a lot of people wanted to make the argument in 2023 that he was better than Elly De La Cruz, or at least what he put together in 2023 was better than what Elly put together in 2023. I think we all know that the upside and everything, the superstardom that Elly De La Cruz is destined for gives him a higher ceiling than Matt McLain. But Matt McLain's still really stinking good. And to have him healthy and to have him on the team every single day, in the lineup every single day, is going to be so huge. So you look at this lineup and you could conceive like a lineup where it's like TJ Friedel leading off, Matt McLain hitting second, Elly De La Cruz hitting third, maybe CES hitting fourth, Tyler Stevenson hitting fifth, Jeimer Candelario hitting sixth. And you feel really good about that. I mean, that's a really strong 1 through 6. So it definitely stings, the loss of Spencer Steer and what that will mean for the roster. And there's definitely some decisions that are going to need to be made. How does this affect the 26th man on the roster now, the final guy on the bench, right? The number 13 guy on the bench, as it were. Does that open up the opportunity for a Reese Hines or a Blake Dunn or maybe even a Cooper Bowman to make it onto the roster? That's a discussion for a different episode. But I believe that the everyday production, the stuff that we really need to be concerned with, I think the Reds can weather that storm as of right now. As long as we don't see them go through another firestorm of injuries like they endured last spring training. but I believe that they can handle this, especially when you think about Gavin Lux as well. I forgot to mention him. It was a great move by Nick Krall where he had Jonathan India. And some people are probably saying, well, even if you just had Jonathan India, you would feel okay with a Spencer Steer injury. But Nick Krall was not satisfied. And I'll explain what I mean about that coming up next. Also, this definitely changes how I view Spencer Steer in his 2025 expectations. I'll explain why next. I've got the perfect future that you can take over to our friends at FanDuel right now and maybe cash in a few dollars for yourself this baseball season, because they have all of the different teams and their odds to make the playoffs in 2025. The Reds, they've actually got them at plus 250. So if you put $10 on there, you're going to make $25 on top of that $10 whenever Terry Francona takes them to October, just like we all know they're going to do. So I implore you, go check that out. There's all kind of great futures like that. Plus, you can jump in on some NBA action, some college basketball action, because your first winning $5 bet is going to get you an extra $150 if you're a new user. So head on over to FanDuel.com right now, get in on the action, take advantage of that bonus, and put some cash over on the Reds to make the playoffs with those odds at plus 250, because FanDuel is the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. That way you don't miss any content that we've got coming for you, because we're with you all throughout spring training, leading up to opening day, getting you ready for what's going to be a very exciting 2025 Cincinnati Reds season. And thanks so much for joining me here today. It's great to be back. I took a nice long trip and visited the Shamrock Isles of Ireland and took a little bit of an adventure off, and appreciate Steve for kind of keeping the ship right while I was gone. And of course I come back and I'm feeling under the weather. So I appreciate you bearing with me and how interesting I sound today. Hopefully it'll be on tomorrow, but I'm going to be with you all throughout the week. Steve is on his own little bit of a trip, and then we'll be back together, Steve and myself, coming up next week. But all throughout this week, we're going to be looking at a bunch of different spring training storylines and what I'm buying, what I'm selling. And one of the reasons that I've bought this early season performance from guys like Matt McLain, CES, Ellie De La Cruz is just for the fact that they look healthy, they look ready to go. And I love that. I'm not worried about the batting average and the slugging percentage and the number of extra base hits that they're getting in spring training. Those numbers do not matter, but it's how they look. It's what they're presenting on the field and the confidence that they're building in their own abilities that are leading me to believe that the Reds can weather this storm of a Spencer Steer injury. The other thing about the roster and how it can move in a positive way without Spencer Steer is because of the addition of Gavin Lux. And I was kind of starting to lay this out there that, Jonathan India could have at least filled in a lineup form had he still been on this roster. But Gavin Lux can add the glove. You can play Gavin Lux in multiple positions. They've been doing it at third base all throughout spring training, kind of getting him ready to play at the hot corner. I'm sure we'll see Gavin Lux in the outfield as well. He'll play second base, maybe even a little bit of first base. The Reds have plenty of options at first base, albeit nothing has really grabbed hold of the first base job right now, but they have multiple players that can play there. And I just think that Gavin Lux gives them that ability where he can move around where they need him. Spencer Steer was going to be a super utility guy, and he's going to be that whenever he is completely healthy. He has said before, he does not want to get stuck at first base, albeit that's his best position. It seems as though that's where he looks the most comfortable for the Reds, at least so far in his young career. And I get it, and I know Steve's made this argument before, and I know that we've heard this from Spencer Steer before, but he's not playing second base. That's Matt McLain. Matt McLain is playing second base. So where else does Spencer Steer fit? He fits great at first base. But he ultimately wants to be that super utility, and I think that he will get that opportunity when he's healthy. Until he's healthy, Gavin Lux can fill that role just fine. And I think that Nick Krall did a savvy job of flipping Jonathan India for rotation stability and Brady Singer, and then turning around and going and getting Gavin Lux and bringing in a guy who does what they wanted Jonathan India to do, but I don't believe they thought he could do it. Ask yourself, do you think that Jonathan India could have fielded a different position than second base? Because I don't think so. And I think we might see him play that or try that in Kansas City. New spot, new eyeballs, new people making decisions about him. We'll see how that all works. But that's beside the point. The whole point is Gavin Lux also adds to my confidence about the Reds moving and covering any sort of injury to Spencer Steer. But individually, I think that we all expected going into 2024 that Spencer Steer was the most consistent force in this lineup. Day in and day out, you knew you're going to have to deal with him. He was going to be a tough at bat. He was probably going to draw a lot of walks, have a nice on-base percentage, pretty solid batting average, and get you those power numbers as well. He got you the power numbers. He did not get you the consistency in 2024. And based on what he said in the clip where he was talking about the cortisone shot and recovering his shoulder and all that stuff, I am to believe that a lot of what he did last year was based on this injury that he was dealing with. He changed his game so that he didn't have to go on the IL, but he had to play a different game. Think about when you get hurt, like your body sort of reacts differently and you're able to walk around, albeit with a limp, or something like that. That's kind of what this was. He was able to play baseball, but differently from what he is used to. So that's why we didn't see that consistency. That's why we didn't see the guy that can really put the ball where they weren't whenever he needed to, but also lace a line drive into the gap whenever the Reds needed that too. It felt like it was few and far between that he was able to come back with some sort of significant power. And I thought that we were going to see that consistency return this year. I still believe that. In fact, I believe that even more now than before he received the cortisone shot. The problem is it's not going to begin on opening day. I stand firm to this. And until the Reds come out and say, and quite frankly, until the Reds come out and say that he's on the opening day roster, I tend to believe that we are not going to see Spencer Steer for maybe the first few weeks of the season. I think it's optimistic to believe that he'll hit the IL for the minimum amount of time and then we'll see him back. I tend to believe that we will see him more toward the end of April. That's just my gut feeling on this. And again, nobody's reporting this. This is not something that the team has come out and said that they're even putting him on the IL yet. But I think that Terry Francona is not ruling it out because he thinks that might be the best course of action for Spencer Steer personally. The Reds are going to operate differently from years past, where we saw guys probably playing hurt. While that might still be the case a little bit now, I don't think it's going to be the norm. And I think that they look at what Spencer Steer is going through, and sure, he can DH, but is that really what's best for him long term? Are we really going to say that he's going to completely retrain his game around this shoulder injury, and then the shoulder injury is just never going to fully heal? That seems very short-sighted, and I'm very glad that the Reds are changing course on this from a personal standpoint for Spencer Steer. And because of that, I'm looking at this and saying, I'm thinking 100, what would that take off? That would probably take off 20 games or so. So maybe 140 games, maybe 135 games for Spencer Steer in 2025. So in those 135 games, you kind of like take the counting stats down a little bit, probably a little bit tougher for him to get past that 20 home run plateau. He might still be around there, might be 2021 homers, something like that. But I still want to see, I think that my goal, my expectations for Spencer Steer are about the consistency in his game. What does the batting average look like? What does the on-base percentage look like? What's the slugging percentage look like? Those are the things that we're going to see more from him this year than the counting stuff. Everybody made the argument to me, Jeff, his 2024 wasn't that bad because of how many homers he hit and how many RBIs he got. That's going to be tested this year. His counting stats are not going to look as good. But how does his consistency look with his rate stats? That's what's going to be the expectation for Spencer Steer in 2025 because he's going to be playing less games than he did last year. And I think we're going to see that 130 to 135 game range because of this injury. And I think that's a good thing. It's a very good thing for him individually. And like I said earlier on, I believe that the Reds can weather that storm. We're celebrating the big dog coming up next. If you can't watch us on YouTube, you can always listen to us on your favorite podcasting app. We're seriously, Locked On Reds is seriously on every single podcasting app out there. I have not seen one that we aren't on. If you see that, hit me up. I'd be interested to know. But I wanted to close out today. We've been doing this series, counting down to opening day. We're 24 days away from opening day. Hope you got your opening day tickets. I got mine. Really excited. Sitting in section 131. Let's go. It's going to be such a good day, and I'm really hoping for good weather because we know how, March and April on the Ohio River is. But excited for that. 24 days away, which obviously the number 24 is retired for a very, very good reason, and that reason is Tony Perez, the big dog, which I know there's many of you out there that remember watching Tony Perez as a Cincinnati Red during the Big Red Machine days. And so you're going to know him a lot more than I do, where I just get to read about him and kind of look back on his career. But just kind of want to point out a few things. I mean, obviously, one of the best Reds that there ever was. So many people, and I'm not going to get into that argument here. This is not a Joey Votto versus Tony Perez debate, but I think it's hilarious that has become a thing throughout Joey Votto's career. And I know that Joey Votto would not want it that way, but that's just something that us fans love to do. And it's really just a new age fan, a current age fan versus a previous age fan. And it's a little bit of jealousy. I mean, if current age fans would be honest, and I'm honest, I'm jealous. I didn't get to see Tony Perez play. I didn't get to see the Big Red Machine play, the best team of all time play. And it's just interesting to see what Tony Perez did through that Hall of Fame career. The 7-time All-Star, in case you're unfamiliar with Tony Perez, Hall of Famer, 7-time All-Star. Of course, he won the World Series in 75 and 76. But even before that, I mean, he was actually a better player, at least according to WAR. He was a better player before the Reds won the World Series, before the back-to-back World Series championships, because from 68 through 73, he averaged 5.5 WAR per season. You go back to 1970 when he had a 7.2 WAR. He had 317 batting average for the year and a 990 OPS. 990 OPS in 1970. Just phenomenal to see some of the numbers that he went through and all the different things that he was able to do, and to be the glue, as so many people talked about, in the clubhouse for the crazy awesome personalities that were part of the Big Red Machine. And everybody was like, it was Tony Perez, man. Everybody knew. I always know, my dad always told me, it's just like, it was Tony Perez that kept them all together. And whenever the Reds got too big for their britches after 1976 and said, yeah, we can let you go. We can let you go. That was sort of the end of it. It's so funny to think that even way back then, like, there's so many Reds fans now that, and don't be this Reds fan, by the way, but there's so many Reds fans now that are like looking ahead to the future and wondering, can the Reds sign Elly De La Cruz long term? What's going to happen? The Reds have been doing this for so long. Even before the 70s, but you go all the way back to 1976 when they get rid of Tony Perez. If you can get rid of Tony Perez, you can get rid of anybody. And they've done that with so many different players all throughout my lifetime. So just get ready for it, Like we root for an organization that loves to do the small market thing, right? You can't keep them all together. Got to get rid of somebody so that we can afford the other players, things like that. Whatever the rationale is, it just happens. You go back to Tony Perez in 1976. They retire. The Reds have his number retired. And it's clear Just ask any Reds fan that knows anything about the Big Red Machine how important Tony Perez is to the franchise, to the history of the franchise. And this organization was still okay with getting rid of him, with trading him away, letting him go. That's what we deal with here. So don't be surprised, whenever you see your favorite player get traded. I've even heard some people this offseason that are distraught that the Reds traded Jonathan India. The Reds play in the business of trading away players almost more than they play in the business of acquiring big-time players. They want to see those players rise up and grow. And as much as this dose of reality is coming at a time when I'm trying to celebrate Tony Perez, that's just kind of what I'm thinking. Like, if the Reds can get rid of Tony Perez, where's the line? They kind of obliterated the line with Tony Perez. But obviously, in the whole series, in case you're unfamiliar with it, we're doing is, counting down the days, 24 days to opening day. We talk about the best player to wear that number. Tony Perez, far and away the best number, 24. In fact, the only guy that's close to him also won a World Series with the Reds back in 1940, Ivel Goodman. He was a middle infielder for the Reds, kind of moved around between shortstop and second base, but that's how much better Tony Perez was than any other person that wore the number 24. I would suspect there are very few, if any, folks in the chat today that can name to me, and I'm sure you're going to look it up. You're going to look it up and you're going to be able to find the numbers, but name to me another player to have worn 24 in the history of the Reds. There's some names, but you got to go back, man, because you go all the way back pre-1964 when Tony Perez burst onto the scene. That's what we're talking about. Like, Tony Perez, just one of the icons of the history of this franchise. And happy to kind of look back on his career, and don't love the link that it creates in my mind to present days, but it's not to Tony Perez's fault. It's just the team that we love to root for. But hey, 24 days away to opening day. So excited to see what this team's going to continue to do through spring training. Like I said, we're talking about some spring training storylines, things that I'm buying, things that I'm selling, coming up on tomorrow's podcast. I've noticed a trend when it comes to the lineup, and I really want to dive into what that is because it's a trend that I didn't expect. I expected it to be the opposite. We'll discuss that into more detail on the next Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure you join me all throughout the week. It's just going to be me and you talking Reds baseball. Steve will be back with me next week, but you can trust that even solo, I'm going to be Locked On Reds every single day. To everybody that got from start to finish listening to this voice, I really hope it's going to be cleared here in the next couple of days because